Welcome everybody to the next in our explainer videos for Baldurs Gate 3. Having looked at the base stats and skills, we are simply going to move along in the character pane and look at the detailed view tab. And I'm simply going to go from top to bottom explaining all of these different points and how they can be modified, affected, and how they go towards the rest of your gameplay. So the first one is hit points. Each class has different amounts of hit points per level it goes up. So for this character who is a paladin, the first level always gets a standard base number. For paladin that's 10, and then for every level I go up I get half that number plus 1. So for every level I increase as a paladin I will get plus 6 hit points. Now if I'm multi-class, this will change to be worked out the same way but for the different class that I multi-class into, because not all of them have a base of 10. And then on top of that, you also get a bonus from your Constitution modifier. And the way this is worked out is whatever your Constitution modifier is, times your current level. So as you can see, I've got a plus 6, that's because my Constitution modifier is a plus 2, and I am level 3. This, just as an FYI, can be changed retrospectively. Say if I get to level 5, and I improve my Constitution modifier from a plus 2 to a plus 3, the amount of extra HP I get due to my Constitution modifier will change from a 10 to 15. This is a 5 times 2 to a 5 times 3. So just so you know, if you change your Constitution modifier later down the track, it does add retrospectively to the levels you already have. So you don't need to, for instance, attempt to worry, oh, get my Constitution modifier upgraded early so I can get all of the benefits. The benefits will be applied retrospectively. Next down we have armor class. This is very easily worked out. The armor that you're wearing gives you a base armor. For my paladin, I am wearing armor that gives me 14. And then on top of this, you get the dexterity modifier for your character. As you can see, I get a plus 1 from my dexterity modifier. Now, there are some restrictions on this. For instance, if you're wearing heavy armor, you won't get anything from your dexterity modifier. If you're wearing medium armor, it's limited to a plus 2. If you're wearing light or no armor, it is whatever your dexterity modifier is. Now, there are other things that can affect your armor class. For instance, if you are a barbarian and you get the feature which allows you to add your Constitution modifier if you are not wearing any armor, then that will, of course, also be added to your armor class. So in terms of this, generally, obviously, heavy armor is better, depending on the character you're playing. If you're playing a very high dexterity character, it might be worth wearing slightly lighter armor. Always bear that in mind, that there are limits and modifiers. Next, you can just see we've got our class that just tells me the class that I am a paladin, and my subclass that I have gone and chosen. Well, I didn't really choose this one. As a paladin, I've become an oathbreaker because I broke my oath. Then, of course, race, which you choose on character creation, and background. The background affects your character. When you go and choose it, you get 2 proficiencies in skills. But how this mostly affects your gameplay is that if you do a certain action which resonates with the type of background you've chosen, there is a chance you can get inspiration. Now I'm going to step away slightly from the screen to just quickly talk about inspiration, as I've just gone and brought it up. Inspiration, as I said, can be gained if you do something that resonates with the background you have chosen. It can be seen if you press the P hotkey on your keyboard. As a noble, I learned Astarian's history as a magistrate, and I acquired a soul coin for my personal collection. And those 2 things resonated with me being a noble, and so then gave me inspiration. Inspiration can be used when you go to do a skill roll. Say if you fail that skill roll, say you needed a 15 and you rolled a 12 after modifiers, if you have inspiration, you can choose to re-roll that skill check. Now, bear in mind, you can only have 4 inspiration at the most. The way this works in technicality is they've allowed you to have 1 inspiration per character. Now, it's a little bit looser than this on Baldurs Gate 3 because the same character can in fact get inspired 4 times in a row. It's not strictly 1 per person, but it works out as you've got a party of 4, you can have a maximum of 4 inspiration. Below the background, we have our attributes. which the first one up is initiative. Now, your initiative is basically just your dexterity modifier. There are some other things that can affect it, some other skills, or maybe some items that you go and collect, but generally it is just your dexterity modifier. An initiative is a skill check that you do at the beginning of combat. So at the beginning of combat, you will roll a d20. Just to remind you, for those of you that may not know, that's a 20-sided dice, and you will add your initiative modifier. So again, the higher this is, the higher number you are likely to get on an initiative roll, and so the earlier during a round of combat you are likely to go. I will talk more on this when I do an explainer video on combat. Movement speed, it says speed, but it's actually translated to distance. This is the maximum amount of distance you can move in a normal move. Now, of course, there are many things that can modify this, and as a action, or potentially a bonus action as a rogue, you can dash, which allows you to take your movement speed again. Dark vision range, this is how far you can see in the dark. As you can see, I have a dark vision range of 40 feet, so anything up to 40 feet away from me that might be mildly obscured or obscured, I have a higher chance of seeing. This really only comes into effect during combat when you're trying to hit things at range. So if you're a melee character, it can have an effect, but it's not really as important. I am a humanoid. I am size of medium. Most of the races on the game are medium, barring gnome and dwarf. I don't think there are any more off the top of my head, but I may have missed one. And they are small. This just generally means that you're going to have a lesser movement speed. In terms of the mechanic of the game, there's not really too much that your size goes and affects. My weight, I weigh 200 pounds. Again, not really too much of a thing unless for some reason someone in your party wants to throw you across a room. The heavier you are, which means they'd have to be stronger to throw you across a room. And carrying capacity, again, this doesn't really so much affect anything to do with equipment or what you want to use, because you will always have far more carrying capacity than the weight of anything you need to equip. This is morely just the convenience of being able to carry more items, potentially in between getting to vendors, and so having more stuff to sell. And so more importantly, proficiency. As you can see, my proficiency bonus is a +2. We did touch on this in the last video. At level 5, it becomes a +3, and at level 9, it will become a +4. And so proficiency is added to anything you are basically proficient in. So as we see below here, I am proficient in 4 types of armor, which is all the armor in the game. Also, being a paladin, I am proficient in all of the simple weapons and all of the martial weapons. Now, when it comes to weapons, being proficient in them helps during your combat roll, which once again I will talk about more when we get into the combat explainer video. It also does give you extra actions if you are proficient with the weapons you have equipped. As for armor, you once again also want to be proficient with the armor that you're wearing, or there will be detrimental effects to your character. In essence, being efficient in more armors or weapons increases the variety of items that you can equip. But of course, depending on your type of character, this may or may not really have too much of an effect on the larger side of things, because for instance, if we come across, my rogue is only proficient in light armor. But as a rogue is a high dexterity class, I don't really want to have him in anything but light armor, because I want the maximum dexterity modifier to his armor and everything else that he is doing. So it all kind of works out in the end. And as you can see, I am proficient in no musical instrument. Why? Because Bruce Wayne doesn't know how to play any musical instruments. It's just a fact. He can play 3 notes on a piano, and then he just goes down to his Batcave and kicks people's ass. It's just how Bruce Wayne works. And in terms of getting proficiencies, you can get a few through feats, which you will get at various levels of playing the game, but most of them you get either through the class you have gone and chosen, or potentially through the race you are as well. Saving throws. Once again, saving throws are mostly a combat thing, and I'll go through more of them through the combat video, but the basic of it is if that somebody attempts to do an action that requires a saving throw, and there are quite a lot of these in the game, it will state which stat of saving throw it requires. In other words, is it a strength saving throw? Is it a constitution saving throw? Is it a charisma saving throw? And how this works is the same as initiative or any of the skill checks. When you go to do a saving throw, you will roll a d20 for whatever skill you are rolling against, and then your saving throw bonus will be added on afterwards as a modifier. So having a high saving throw bonus makes it once again easier to pass the d20 throw, or in other words, the saving throw. And at the bottom we have tags. These will only really ever come into effect it's on a narrative point of view. For instance, being Baldurian, if you start speaking to people about Baldurs Gate, you might get another dialogue option. But your tags don't really come into too many things too often. It's more on the narrative role-playing side of the game. Now, just looking at a couple of other things. If we look at Asterion, which is a pre-made character of the game, you can see he has approval. Now, as you can see, there are two people's names there, Hela and Bruce Wayne. These are the characters that both myself and the person I am playing this game with on multiplayer have gone and created. They are basically our avatars. And if you use any of the pre-made characters from Baldur's Gate 3, they will have approval against any of your avatars. And this again is changed on a role-playing basis, whether you agree with them, whether you help them, whether you win them over with conversations of love and cuddles. And the higher the approval is, the easier it will in fact then be to win them over with certain decisions and in certain circumstances. And of course, if you so wish to roleplay through a romance with any of the characters in the game, you are going to need to get their approval first. And then just two honorable mentions for this video, as they didn't really fit in anywhere else, if I'm perfectly honest, but they will be touched on more, at least one of them will be in combat. It's if we come back to this first screen, the two things I'm going to mention are resistances and notable features. Now, your resistances, this very simply, as it states basically, is your resistance to different types of damage. Now, there are several types of weapon damage: piercing, slashing, bludgeoning, and there are of course all of the magic elemental damages as well. Now, if you have any resistances, unfortunately I don't be able to show you, but they will come up here. And what that will tell you if you are resistant or immune. Resistance drops the damage by 50%, immunity obviously drops the damage by 100%. And just as an FYI, you can also be vulnerable, which will also show here in resistances. It's a negative resistance, I suppose you could put it that way if it needs to make sense. And also it will tell you whether you are resistant to normal damage of that type, magical damage of that type, or of course both. This does vary. For instance, if you stand in fire and you are fire immune from normal damage, you will not take any damage. If someone hits you with particular types of spells and hits you with magical damage, you will, however, still potentially take damage, depending on if you are resistant to one or the other or both. And the last thing I wanted to mention on this video was the notable features. These are features that your characters have, either gained through a few events in the game can earn you some, learned feats, your race, your class. These are generally things that you will gain as time goes on. For instance, if I come down here and hover over Divine Health, as you can see, because of the divine magic flowing within me, it prevents disease from affecting me. This is a paladin feature and basically means that I cannot be diseased. If we come across here to my wonderful rogue Asterion, Elven weapon training. He is also proficient in the longsword, short bow, and longbow. Now, any elf will obviously get elven weapon training, but they might not get these weapon proficiencies through their class. So this is where you can use your race to make a little bit of a difference upon character creation. And so that is the end of this video. Once again, I hope you've learned something. I hope you are leaving this video with some useful knowledge that you didn't have when you started watching. And I hope you will continue to join me. There will be a few more explainer videos. The next one I am hoping to make, just so you know, is going to be on combat. And so until then, that just leaves me to say that until we see you again, I hope that you can stay safe, happy, and healthy.